Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're really getting into it, tackling probably the most defining and certainly the most violent chapter in American history, the Civil War.
Right. We've gathered quite a bit of material, historical accounts, analyses looking at the causes, the key battles, and maybe most importantly, the huge changes that came after.
Revolution that followed the smoke, as it were.
Exactly. Our goal today is pretty straightforward. Try to grasp the sheer scale of this thing. It's not just about dates and names. We need to understand why this war really did change everything. Government structure, the military's role, even what it means to be a citizen.
We'll follow the timeline, mostly, but focus on the specifics, the people, the tech.
Yeah, the human side and the technological shifts. That's what makes it feel, in many ways, like the first modern war.
Okay, let's dive in. It's a huge topic. And to really get the war, you can't just start in 1861, right? You have to look earlier. The sources really point to two very different Americas existing side by side for decades, kind of heading for a collision.
That's absolutely the starting point. This divide, it wasn't just North versus South on a map. It ran much deeper ideologically, economically. So in the North, you've got the society that's industrializing incredibly fast. Factories popping up, canals, railroads spreading everywhere.
And the labor system.
Based on free wage earners. And, that kind of system benefits from or even encourages a strong central government, one that can regulate trade, fund big projects, maybe set tariffs.
So federal power seen as a positive, a tool for progress almost.
Yeah.
What about the South then?
A completely different world, really. Overwhelmingly agricultural. Their whole economy was built around cash crops. Cotton was king, but also tobacco, sugar. And this entire system was, well, utterly dependent on the forced labor of enslaved African Americans. It wasn't just part of the economy, it was the economy, supported by this idea of chattel slavery.
Described in one source with that chilling phrase, the brutal weight of perpetual bondage.
That's it. And to protect that system, the South needed political leverage.
Which translates to states' rights?
Yeah.
Pushing back against federal interference?
Exactly. They were strong advocates for the idea that state governments should have the final say, especially on issues of property. And in the Southern view, enslaved individuals were legally defined as property. So the fight becomes, can the federal government dictate terms about slavery to the states?
That fundamental, deadly question, as you call it. The one that just couldn't be papered over with compromises anymore.
The pressure just kept building. And then 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln, that was the catalyst.
Lincoln and the new Republican Party.
Correct.
Their main platform was stopping slavery from spreading west.
Right.
Not necessarily ending it everywhere immediately.
Correct. He didn't initially campaign on immediate abolition in the existing slave states, but for the South, stopping the spread was seen as the beginning of the end for their entire system. They read his election, quite frankly, as an existential threat, almost, as they put it, an act of war against their economy and their way of life.
And the reaction was immediate. Secession started almost the moment he won. But the actual fighting, the point of no return, that was April 12th, 1861, Charleston Harbor.
Fort Sumter. Confederate cannons opening fire on the federal troops holding the fort. The accounts describe this relentless bombardment, 34 straight hours.
Wow.
And even there, you see the technology starting to play a role. The telegraph existed. News of this attack, the start of the shooting, it spread like wildfire, galvanized both sides almost instantly.
So the split becomes violently real. 11 southern states secede, form the Confederate States of America, the CSA. Jefferson Davis becomes their president.
And Lincoln's administration refuses to recognize them, insists they're states in rebellion, not a separate nation.
Which creates this incredibly tragic situation, basically two governments claiming the same territory, demanding loyalty from the same people.
Yes, and that's where you get those heart-wrenching stories of families divided, brother literally fighting against brother. It tore the nation apart at the most personal level.
And the scale of the war that followed. It's hard to even picture. This wasn't just a few battles on the border.
No, not at all. Geographically, it stretched from Virginia and Pennsylvania in the east all the way down the Mississippi into the west. Battles like Bull Run, Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, they involved massive armies moving across huge distances.
Far larger, really, than conflicts Europe had seen up to that point, in terms of the sheer land involved.
Absolutely. It was vast, enabled by new tech, as we'll see, but often fought with tactics that led to just unbelievable carnage. The human cost is the most shocking part.
Over 600,000 soldiers died. That number is just.
It's staggering. More American deaths than in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam combined.
Let that sink in. 600,000. And the sources make clear these weren't quick, clean deaths often. Disease, infection, starvation took a terrible toll alongside the battlefield wounds.
And that massive death toll, that scale of suffering, it connects directly to the changing technology of warfare. Well, this was really the first major war where rifled muskets were widely used. They were much more accurate, had a longer range than the old smoothbores, but the tactics were often still Napoleonic massed infantry charges. So you have soldiers advancing into incredibly accurate rifle fire. The result was slaughter on an industrial scale.
That mismatch, modern killing efficiency, older tactics seems like a hallmark of the early war years. But the tech wasn't just about guns. Railroads played a huge role.
Oh, absolutely critical. Railroads transformed logistics. Armies could be moved, supplied, reinforced much faster and over greater distances than ever before.
So if one side took heavy losses, they could potentially rush in thousands of replacements relatively quickly.
Exactly. The Union, with its more developed rail network, had a significant advantage there, and generals like Grant and Sherman understood this. A key part of their later strategy was destroying the South's railroads, crippling their ability to move men and material.
And on the water, another revolution. Ironclad ships.
Right. The famous duel between the Monitor and the Merrimac, or the Virginia, as the Confederates called her, that basically made wooden warships obsolete overnight.
A whole new era of naval warfare began right there.
And again, it highlights the North's industrial strength. They could build these new ironclads more effectively than the agrarian South could.
But all this technology, all this fighting, it didn't break the political deadlock initially. The war's purpose itself started to shift, didn't it?
It did. It evolved. It started as a war to preserve the Union, to stop secession, but it became something more profound. It became a war about freedom itself.
And the key moment there was Lincoln's action in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. This is where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. It's often misunderstood. It wasn't a blanket declaration freeing all enslaved people immediately. It was a strategic military order. It declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states the Confederacy were, and henceforward shall be free.
So it specifically didn't apply to the border states that stayed loyal to the Union, or areas already under Union control. Why that distinction?
It was politically crucial to keep those border states loyal, but more importantly, it fundamentally changed the nature of the war. First, it aimed to disrupt the Confederate war effort.
By encouraging enslaved people to leave the plantations, undermining their labor force.
Precisely. Slavery wasn't just a social system, it was the engine of their economy and logistics. Freeing enslaved people was a direct blow to their ability to wage war. Second, it shifted the international perspective.
How so?
European powers, like Britain and France, had been flirting with recognizing the Confederacy, partly for economic reasons like cotton. But after the proclamation, backing the Confederacy meant explicitly backing a nation fighting for slavery. That became morally untenable for them.
So it solidified the Union cause internationally as a fight for liberty. What was the impact on the ground among African Americans?
The sources call it the sound of hope. It was monumental. As Union armies pushed south, enslaved people sought freedom behind Union lines in massive numbers, and critically, it opened the door for black men to enlist. Thousands joined the Union Army in segregated units, the United States Colored Troops, or USCT. They fought with incredible bravery for their own freedom in battles like Fort Wagner.
A fight for the Union, now explicitly linked to the fight for liberation. And that same summer, 1863, saw the major military turning point, didn't it? Gettysburg.
Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, July 1st to 3rd. Probably the most famous battle, certainly the largest ever fought on the continent. 3 days of absolutely brutal fighting, something like 50,000 casualties combined. General Lee took a huge gamble, invading the North, hoping a decisive victory would force Lincoln to sue for peace.
But the Union Army held its ground. A costly victory, but a crucial one.
Absolutely crucial. Lee's army was shattered, they were forced to retreat back south, and the Confederacy never really mounted another major offensive invasion into the North again. It was the high water mark. They couldn't win after Gettysburg, though the war dragged on.
And a few months later, Lincoln goes to Gettysburg to dedicate the cemetery. Delivers that incredibly short, powerful speech.
The Gettysburg Address. Yeah, it's brief, but it fundamentally reframed the war's meaning for the nation. He wasn't just talking about preserving borders. He talked about testing whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, could actually survive. He tied the horrific sacrifice directly to the survival of democracy itself.
Powerful stuff.
Oh.
Which brings us towards the end. After Gettysburg, and with Grant taking overall command, the Union strategy shifted again, right? Towards total war.
Pretty much. Generals Grant and Sherman especially understood that to win, they had to destroy the South's capacity and will to fight. That meant not just defeating Confederate armies, but destroying railroads, factories, seizing crops, burning infrastructure, making it impossible for the South to sustain the war effort. Sherman's March to the Sea is the most famous example.
A brutal, grinding strategy. And by early 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing.
Yeah, it was crumbling from within and under relentless military pressure. The end finally came on April 9th, 1865.
Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia.
General Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant. The terms are relatively generous, actually. Grant let the Confederate soldiers keep their horses, go home, basically try to rebuild. It was a moment of exhaustion, maybe relief, but also solemnity.
But the relief was short-lived. An unbelievable tragedy followed just days later.
5 days after the surrender, Abraham Lincoln, the president who had steered the nation through this entire ordeal, was assassinated while watching a play at Ford's Theater in Washington.
Gut-wrenching timing. The nation wins the war, loses its leader, and has to face the monumental task of reconstruction without him.
A profound shock. But despite that tragedy, the war's outcomes were clear and transformative. The Union was preserved. The question of secession was settled by force. Federal authority was unquestionably asserted over the starts.
And, most fundamentally, slavery was destroyed.
Yes. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified later in 1865, formally abolished slavery everywhere in the United States forever. No exceptions.
That wasn't just ending the war. It was launching a new era, trying to figure out what freedom meant, how to rebuild the South, how to integrate millions of newly freed people into American life. That was Reconstruction.
Exactly. So if you look at the big picture, the sources really hammer this home. The Civil War changed everything. The power of the federal government, the nature of the military, citizenship, the economy, the very idea of America. It proved at an almost unimaginable cost that liberty, as Lincoln suggested, sometimes requires defense, and that unity isn't guaranteed. It has to be fought for when challenged so fundamentally. It taught the world, maybe, that liberty is not free.
So, thinking about this for you, the listener, we've talked about this collision of old and new. You have these incredible 19th century technologies, telegraphs for instant strategy, railroads moving huge armies, iron ships changing naval power forever. Yet alongside that, you have this almost ancient brutality. The mass infantry charges, the sheer scale of death, 600,000 lives lost, often horribly. It makes you wonder, when a core political idea, like self-government or liberty, is pushed to its absolute limit, does its survival almost inevitably demand a human cost that seems way out of proportion to the technological sophistication of the era? Is there always this disconnect between our ideals and the messy, bloody reality of defending them? Something to think about.
A sobering thought?
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the roots, the realities, and the revolution of the American Civil War.